do people work remotely? Our next speaker has the data to give us an answer. He's a lecturer at the Oxford Internet Institute, and he's also the founder of the Datenwissenschaftliche Gesellschaft in Berlin. And his data has a really interesting answer to that question. Please welcome Dr. Fabian Braesemann.
Thank you. Hi. Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction. So you already talked about some of the things I wanted to bring up now. So what is this talk about? It's about the future of work and why it is not remote. This is not to say that we want to talk about or deny the technical feasibility. Obviously, we all know technically it is feasible to work remote because of all the digital technologies that we have seen, a huge uptake in Zoom, Teams, and particularly all the organizational shift that we have in the workforce by now. Instead, this talk is about the consequences remote work might have for the spatial organizations, for the economic geography of work, particularly whether it's realistic to assume that so many people will work remote that the overall relationship between place and, so the workplace and the location where people are, is actually diminishing. Most importantly, I want to look into the urban-rural divide. So this hopefully is representing this to some extent. On the right-hand side, we have the urban environment. On the left-hand side, a rural environment. Why is there a divide? This divide has been developing over the past 2 centuries with all the Industrial Revolution that we just heard Morten talk about. It has only become more important because of the increasing amount of economic prosperity that is gained in urban environments. But now, maybe this is all going to change. This at least is the hope brought to us by the remote work trend. So let us delve right into this and look at what the overall sentiment has been towards remote work throughout the COVID pandemic, because obviously it is the COVID pandemic that made everyone rethink where to work. So what we see here on this slide is a headline from the Harvard Business Review from early 2020. You can see this is from February 2020, and this article was starting to talk about the idea of remote work in a very negative way. It was considered as an emergency situation. Obviously it was. But what is interesting to us here is where the desk, where the laptop is. It is not in an office environment anymore. It was put out of the office environment and instead, visually obviously only as a trick here, put into the middle of a sea or lake to obviously imply there's a drowning situation. So a very negative portrayal. How did this develop? As we all know, things turned better. We all got used to the new work environment. So by September 2020, right in the middle of the first year of lockdown, etc., the discussion changed quite a bit. Instead of talking about emergency, now the discussion regarding remote work went towards that it doesn't have to mean all-day video calls. So we see a more positive portrayal now. The office worker obviously is not in an office anymore, but also not at home, instead in the middle of the desert. So you can work from everywhere. This is what this photo is to imply. And last but not least, this year, in March 2022, discussion has changed focus again. Now other things are becoming important, and most relevantly here is the sentiment here. So now the question is remote work actually better for the environment? So there's an implication, it is good. It's good for the environment. Without answering this question here in detail, again, look at the picture. What you see is a person enjoying the tranquility and the peace of this countryside environment. So obviously now the idea is people can work from everywhere. So why should we care about paying high rents in metropolitan areas? Why should we not enjoy holiday destinations or the countryside? And also some policymakers took up this idea and thought, okay, maybe it's now a chance for us as rural environments to catch up and eventually get back on track and get our share of the economic prosperity of the world. And I want to convince you that this is not the case, because remote work is not a technical problem. The technical side has been solved, but it is an economic institutional problem. And this is what we have been investigating in our latest research paper at the Oxford Internet Institute. And this is the main figure from this paper. The article is linked at the bottom here of the slide. It is forthcoming in the academic journal PLOS ONE, but a preprint is already available if you want to have a look online. So what is this paper about and what do we see here? We investigated data of a fully remote labor market. Obviously, there is no such thing. You might think that like a remote labor market, but there is platforms very similar to Amazon or eBay. They are called online labor platforms. On Amazon or eBay, commodities are traded via the web. You don't really care where the supplier is of the book or whatever commodity you're buying. And in a similar way, these online labor markets, these remote labor platforms, have established itself over the past 20 years as prime outsourcing destinations. So employers from all over the world can hire people for all kind of office-based works, things like graphic design, programming, financial advisory services, everything you can imagine that is taking place in the office that doesn't require face-to-face interaction. And our question was, okay, how does the geography look like, and particularly what is the effect on the idea of having a level playing field, having a flat world where people from everywhere can really contribute. And what we see here on this map is the locations of employers, blue dots, and the locations of workers, red dots, and yellow lines connecting these. The data here is from 2020. And I think it's very interesting what we see here and what we don't see. First of all, there is no level playing field, there is no flat world, it's not kind of evenly distributed all over the globe. Instead, we have the demand highly clustered in metropolitan areas, little surprise, because this is where the companies are, like at the east coast of the United States, like Boston, New York, San Francisco, LA on the west coast. We have the metropolitan areas in Australia, and plenty of demand coming from big cities in Europe, high-income countries. So these guys would want to outsource their work to places where it is cheaper, where they can save money on the payroll and also where people can earn a good living. But instead of work going to the cheapest places of the world with the lowest living cost, like sub-Saharan Africa, we see it's widely an empty space, even though this is an international marketplace with English as the main language. There is many English-speaking countries. We see most of the supply is also clustering in metropolitan areas. In Southeast Europe, in South Asia, like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and the Philippines. So really, this figure already indicates how the geography looks like, but what we also do, I'm not showing it to you here, you can have a look at the paper if you want. We have run a statistical model with only very small set of macroeconomic and infrastructure variables, and we can explain that it is essentially 3 types of factors that drive all this geography here, a very large majority of it. And these are internet connectivity, so the level of internet infrastructure, human capital or education, and what we call IT specialization of the economy. So the extent to which the local economy is already focused on IT-related services. So if you are lucky to be located in a place, in a region where this is available, you're more likely to participate. If you are unlucky to be in a position where you don't have these factors in your local environment, you are more unlikely to participate. And this is one reason why we're seeing this unequal distribution, because it is really a manifestation of existing inequalities. But how does this really go together with what people can do and how they can participate? And here's the reason for this unequal distribution. It is linked towards the skills people can actually have access to. Jobs in this emerging field of complexity economics, where this paper is a part of, are seen as networks of skills. So a job is really seen as a bundle of individual capabilities or abilities that people might have. And this here comes from the same data set in a different publication from Anderson 2017. And what you see is different dots. These dots represent skills on the demand side of this labor market. And you have big dots and you have small dots, and they are all connected in a dense cloud and a very dense network. And the main takeaway from here is there is some skills that are important, that is the big ones. They cluster in different groups, like green is design, blue is programming, yellow is writing, and red is administrative services. And there's other skills that are less important on the periphery of the network. So if you are lucky, if you have the skills that are in the middle, that are central, you will have a good time, you will rather find a job, and you will have higher wage levels on this online labor market. If you have skills only on the periphery, you will rather find it more difficult to get a job. And if you don't have any of these skills, you won't find a job. So this is the kind of worst outcome. And how is all of this again related to the geography and urban-rural divides? This is because skills that we just looked at, this network of skills, they don't fall from heaven or develop in thin air. They really thrive in relation to certain institutions, and these institutions are linked to locations and mostly thrive in cities. And in the network science discipline, again, cities are also considered as networks, networks of networks, multi-layer networks. You might have seen here a picture like the one I'm printing here on the left-hand side, like an urban environment with a network laid over. This is not only seen as a metaphor in network science, but really taken literally. And here, if you want to know more, there's another source to a great podcast on the topic. And really, we can consider cities as multi-layer networks of all kinds of different economic activities and social activities, but here we're focusing mostly on skill demand and skill supply. So imagine the top layer of this multi-layer network is the demand we just looked at, this dense cloud of the network we just looked at. And the individual numbers here represent individual skills that are connected in some way. Here at the bottom, we have skill supply, so the other end of the market, essentially the skills people have in their combination, being it in-demand skills or not. And cities really work as the connecting tissue. They really allow demand and supply to meet. And how do they do it? And how do they bring these skills to people? They do it because there's all the institutions that are relevant in today's digitalized economy. So I'm talking about vocational training, higher education, business opportunities, innovation, research. All these kind of institutions tend to gather in cities. And it is because of this close relationship between enabling institutions and skills that we conclude that the future of work will not be a remote one, but rather will continue to see cities to grow. And what now to do with that information? What is the main takeaway for everyone, for the reader of the paper, but also everyone in today's economy? First of all, the main takeaway that I would like to bring to you is that the economy should really be seen as a network. This is increasingly taken up in economic research. So the network structure of the economy is taken literal. We have talked a lot about supply chain disruptions in recent weeks. This is one example of a network, the other one you just saw here. And then, depending on who you are, you can do some kind of concrete things based on this insight. First of all, as an employment agency, for example, or as an individual employee, you would want to predict skill demand. You would want to understand what are the in-demand skills. So what will the network look like, and what will be in the center of this network in the future? And you can do this with the data, as I just showed to you. And as an individual freelancer or as an individual employee, you would obviously want to find your own market niche. You want to be in that right niche and not in the one where there is no demand. As a rural policymaker, for example, you would definitely want to invest in internet infrastructure and other forms of infrastructure so that you can connect your rural environment with global network flows. And as a company, be it in a rural or urban environment or as an urban policymaker, you should adapt to further city growth. So this trend towards urbanization is likely to continue throughout the 21st century. And obviously, both as a rural and urban employer, you would want to get access to urban talent as it is more likely to grow in these places. Okay, I hope this could convince you that the future of work will not be a remote one. Thank you very much and looking forward to your feedback.
Thanks a lot, Fabian.
Yeah.
Is that a classical case where how we want the world to be versus what the data shows are two different things? So how hard is it actually for you to get people to buy into your data simply because they stick on to another vision of the world?
Yeah, it's an experiment. I mean, we're going to see today, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, yeah, it is often, the more sober, more simple explanation than, these wishful fantasies that actually, are how the world looks like, I think.
So if you want to dive deeper into the data with him, meet him at the Ask Me Anything corner. Thanks a lot, Fabian.
Thank you very much.